Alrighty. Well, thank you so much for joining us here today at the Connecticut Affordable Housing Conference. It is day 2. We are in the breakout session portion of the day. My name is Danielle Hubley. I manage advocacy and education with the Partnership for Strong Communities. And this year, the conference is themed under the topic of Here for Housing. This is our opportunity every year to convene, collaborate, and drive meaningful change to improve and expand housing affordability, creation, choice, and stability across the state of Connecticut. And since this is happening virtually, a lot of our engagement is happening on social media. So if you are engaging in the conversation on social media, please use the hashtag CAHC 2024 across your socials. That way we can see all of the great comments and key takeaways you're getting from the learning and conversations that are taking place today. Just to orient you to where you are, you have reached and found yourself in session 4.2, Collaborative Solutions for Housing Affordability, the impact of Centers for Housing Opportunity in Connecticut. We've got a great panel conversation for you today, so I won't waste too much more time. I just have to thank all of our presenters and sponsors. Our presenting sponsor, CHAFA, the Connecticut Housing Finance Authority. Wells Fargo is our visionary sponsor. You can see all of our champion sponsors here. Same for our foundation sponsors. We're just so grateful for all of their support, the financial, the personal, the direct investment in this conference every year is always so valuable, and it allows us to make this opportunity free and accessible to as many people as possible. So we're just really grateful for everything that they do. And today's investors sponsor who's supporting the session is Fairfield County's Community Foundation. So thank you very much for offering your support for this session and this conversation today. A few quick housekeeping items before I pass it off to our presenters. Today's session, as you can see, is being recorded. All sessions will be made available on our YouTube channel sometime in the next few weeks. We usually try and get them up pretty quick, so keep an eye out for them there. You have all come in with your microphones muted. Please plan to stay muted just so that we don't have too many sound conflicts. We can hear all of our presenters. Presenters will let you know how they want to engage with you for Q&A. So whether that's through the chat function or if they want you to come off of mute, that's up to them. So they'll let you know how they would like to go about that Q&A portion with you. But the chat is in the bottom right-hand side of your screen. So please feel free to engage in the conversation, throw in thoughts and reactions as they happen. If you have any tech issues or you're finding that you're having trouble connecting throughout the day in this session or in the afternoon, please reach out to either Kayla or myself. We'll do our best to troubleshoot. We've gotten really good at troubleshooting and making sure that everybody can find and access the conference, so we'll be there to support you. Post the session, please, in your lobby, go check the megaphone icon. There you will get a session survey, feedback survey from this session in particular. We'd love to hear your thoughts. It always helps us improve on and build off of the learnings that we've done and make sure that the conference reaches even more folks and is even more accessible. So we appreciate your feedback and hope you'll take some time. It's not long, it'll be very quick, but appreciate that feedback. So without further ado, I'm so excited to pass it off to today's presenters, and I'll kick it over to Julian to get us started today.
Thank you, Danielle, and thank you everyone for joining us this afternoon. Danielle is right around how to ask questions. If you could just put any questions you have as we continue through the presentation in the chat. If you want to ask a specific person that question, if you could just identify them in the chat as well. And we hope to leave about 10 minutes at the end so we can do some audience Q&A, and I'll curate that. As Danielle also mentioned, welcome. You're in Collaborative Solutions for Affordable Housing, and you're going to learn about the impact of the Centers for Housing Opportunity here in our state of Connecticut. Today, you'll be hearing from some of the key strategic partners of the Centers for Housing Opportunity, which is a collective impact initiative aimed at improving the affordability issue in our state. My name is Julian Pierce, and I'm the Director of Economic Opportunity at Fairfield County's Community Foundation. And today I'm joined by Melissa Kaplan-Macy, who is the Chief Initiative Officer with the Centers for Housing Opportunity at the Housing Collective, Sean Gio, who many of you know, who's the Policy Director at the Partnership for Strong Communities, and Jim Horan, who's the Executive Director of LISC Connecticut. At Fairfield County's Community Foundation, our overarching strategic priority is systems change for racial equity. And if you trust the facts, the story and the case for action by philanthropy are clear. Through widespread acts of discrimination in the U.S., including human trafficking, bondage, Jim Crow segregation, redlining, and discriminatory lending, long-standing racial inequities have become entrenched across all of our foundation's results areas, which are education, health, income and wealth, and housing. This won't be a surprise to many of you that have been in this work as long as this panel has, but many of these inequities have actually gotten worse over time. For example, the Black-white homeownership gap is wider today than it was in 1960 when racial segregation was legal. Based on comprehensive data and research, Fairfield County's Community Foundation strongly believes that increasing racial equity can improve the lives of not only those experiencing inequities, but also entire economies. Racial equity, not only in Fairfield County, but across Connecticut, could benefit not only the direct beneficiaries of equity initiatives, but also people who might otherwise feel unaffected by systemic racism and discrimination. And one of our first significant investments in this systems-level, equity-centered work was the Fairfield County Center for Housing Opportunity in 2018. For over a decade, Fairfield County's Community Foundation had been investing in what's called Opening Doors Fairfield County, which utilizes a collective impact approach to coordinate the strategies of prevention, housing, employment, advocacy, and services to ensure that episodes of homelessness are rare, brief, and non-reoccurring, and that all citizens within the region have access to safe, affordable housing. Based on engagement with the partners on this panel as well as others, it was clear that what was missing was something like this body of work, but hyper-focused on working collaboratively across sectors to deliver safe, equitable, affordable housing solutions for families and individuals. Now, over 6 years later, we continue to leverage our collective strengths in capacity building, policy, planning, and philanthropy to support housing solutions that change systems and improve lives. And with that level setting and a bit of history, it's my pleasure to pass it to Melissa to talk more about the specifics of the model and why more than half a decade later, both we as partners and external stakeholders continue to see the work as critically important. Melissa.
Thanks so much, Julian. I will go ahead and share my screen. You can see that. Let me put it into slideshow mode. Okay, can you all see my screen? Excellent.
Yes.
Okay, great. Well, I'm just going to spend a few minutes just level setting the stage a bit, and then we'll turn it back to Julian to talk about together what we've all been up to and to take questions from the audience. So I will just kind of give a brief overview. So as Julian mentioned, CHO, the Centers for Housing Opportunity, is a strategic partnership among the Housing Collective, Partnership for Strong Communities, and LISC Connecticut, really bringing together our strengths and the talents of our organizations to be a team across our nonprofits to tackle one of the biggest challenges that we face in our state, preserving, producing, and protecting affordable housing. And so what we really try and do through this work together is to really all do what we do well together. So from the Housing Collective's perspective, we are the backbone of the homeless service response system in Fairfield County, Northwest Connecticut, and taking that same approach, really thinking about how we could be a backbone organization across and connecting our work together on the affordable housing. And so also along with that, our technical expertise, we have a staff that includes urban planners and folks with policy experience. So we really bring all of those skills together and then really work very collaboratively and closely with partnership on policy and advocacy. And very recently, well, not very recently now, but most recently with LISC Connecticut, who brings their lending and investment skills to this partnership, and really excited to talk more about that work together a little bit later. So what we're doing together is really aligning our resources across our organizations, like I said, leveraging our strength and providing that coordinated support. And actually, as I'm speaking and saying this, here, it seems pretty intuitive and kind of obvious that we would do this in this way together. We're all partners that have worked together for a long time, kind of alongside and near each other, but through this effort, really being very intentional about collaborating as a team. And that is what is different and kind of magical about this, but at the same time seems pretty obvious now that we've been in this work for some time together. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about that history. As Julian mentioned, we began the work in Fairfield County back now in 2018. And Fairfield County Community Foundation really was that critical thought partner, convener who really helped us think about coming together in Fairfield County and how we might align our efforts. As I said to Sean, I feel like I say this often, Sean, because we've been doing this work together for so long. We'd been working together and near each other and bumping into each other, and then not all of a sudden, but through the effort and through the encouragement of the Community Foundation to really be intentional about not just aligning a project here or there and figuring out how we might, kind of help each other out, in different ways, but really thinking about ourselves as teammates and that we could all kind of bring to the table what we do and work across our organizations. And so then in 2021, that work expanded into Litchfield County with partners, again, Community Foundation partners recognizing that as funders, funding a lot of small nonprofits to do similar work, that funders can play a really important role by encouraging, supporting, aligning their fundraising to get all of us moving together in the same direction in really meaningful ways. So out in Litchfield County, that was Berkshire Taconic Community Foundation, the Foundation for Community Health, and the Northwest Community Foundation. And then not so long later in 2023, the Community Foundation of Eastern Connecticut had heard about what was going on in the other regions. And we like to really make a point about this. This is not sort of necessarily, it feels like this very kind of quick expansion across these different regions across the state. It wasn't so much that the partners at the table for CHO came to the regions and said, we're here to help. It was really Community Foundation partners, primarily and other community partners, which we'll talk about in a little bit later, that were very interested in what they were seeing and were looking for similar efforts. So the Community Foundation in Eastern Connecticut in 2023 similarly came to the table and really wanted to do this work in this way with all of us. And so what's also really special about this, not only the Community Foundation partners as fundamental here, but within regions, there are core strategic partners who are also already working regionally, who have come to the table as partners in this work. And so we have this kind of dual level partnership where with LISC and partnership and Housing Collective working across all of our regions, we also have partners that are very focused in the regions where they are. And that's really critical. Excuse me, is that feedback on my side? Can you all hear? Or is this somebody else?
I think we got it.
Can you all hear me? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. That is really, it's this duality where there's this overarching work. We want to make sure that we're connecting dots, that we're replicating best practices, that, in different parts of the state, we're not recreating the wheel. At the same time, recognizing that there are very specific things in different regions, different markets, different partners, different conditions on the ground that are region specific. So being able to pair those things together is really important. So in Fairfield County, we had done and continue to work with the Regional Plan Association, who brings strong research and policy and advocacy to the table. Out in Eastern Connecticut, it's been really exciting to see academic partners and community-based partners like Connecticut College and Eastern Connecticut State and the United Way. And this work continues to evolve and change. And so, there's a lot of ongoing conversation about other regional partners that have an interest and can, be working very closely in collaboration with us. So what does that really look like on the ground? So we have some core initiatives, and under those core initiatives is where we have some specific projects and programs. But overall, across our 3 regions, we're really looking to increase public awareness and galvanize support for affordable housing. And we'll talk about what that looks like in a little bit. One of the very specific mechanical tools we've been really leaning into is assisting communities with implementation of their local affordable housing plans. Communities in Connecticut, as many, but not everyone knows, are required to create a plan for how they will create affordable housing and preserve affordable housing in their communities. And while there is no specific stick in the legislation that provides a consequence, I guess, for not complying with that, it's a really useful and meaningful tool for us programmatically, because it really sets the stage for the conversation around when communities are saying to the state, we would really want to come up with our solutions locally. There is nuance. It's really important that we develop our own tools and strategies that we can then come in as providing technical assistance and support to say, that's great. So how will you then move those plans forward? So it really becomes a tool to really get us past this. Yes, we all think affordable housing is important. And of course, we want it to say, okay, well, what are we going to do and how are we going to move it? So we do spend a lot of time working around that. And then last but not least, really critically, what we're all trying to get to with these first 2 items is creating affordable housing. So whether that's preserving existing units or creating new units, as well as protecting tenants, that's really the piece on the ground where we're focused in terms of all the work that we're doing. So just very quickly, because I know we want to get to our question and answer and discussion piece, but I wanted to share with everyone just some specific examples because it's kind of a lot of words and kind of ideas, but how does that land? What does that really look like in the places where we work across the state? So in Fairfield County, looking at that technical assistance that I mentioned, we are working with 4 communities with Danbury, Ridgefield, Fairfield, and Shelton, and providing them with direct technical assistance, looking at their affordable housing plans and helping them implement specific pieces of that. And then even equally or more exciting to me is bringing that group together as a peer learning cohort and having conversations across communities and bringing other peer experts from Fairfield County to the table. We had a really wonderful meeting last week where not only did we have our 4 communities in the cohort participating, but we also had Greenwich and Stanford at the table as peer experts, and the energy and excitement in the room was really, really wonderful to see. It's really a roll up your sleeves, like let's get this all done together atmosphere that's being created, which is really, really awesome to see. And then we have a whole suite of convenings and conversations, which we term as education to action activities. We're really looking to not only discuss and inform, but then turn that into action. So we have an ongoing series, Fairfield County Talks Housing, which many of you may have participated in. There's a Housing Equity Coalition's work, which we're supporting, and very excited to be launching a new alliance for Fairfield County around housing that really is seeking to bring together all of these conversations and really define and move action forward. In Litchfield County, and I saw Jocelyn here, so please feel free to jump in and help me out, Jocelyn. Jocelyn and her team are doing really tremendous work, very, very specific technical assistance to local affordable housing nonprofits to get to that third bullet, and they're there, and they're really off and running, creating affordable housing units. And so that has been really exciting to see. You'll see there's a photo there at the bottom of a ribbon cutting just about a month or so ago at Sarum Village, and they're really moving the needle on creating the units for affordable housing in Litchfield County. And some other work I really want to highlight that I'm super excited that they're working on, connecting conversations around affordable housing and conservation. And this is, I think, instructive across all of the regions, which is really how do we work across sectors for both, and we can have affordable housing and we can have conservation. We can have affordable housing and amazing schools. We can have affordable housing and all of those other pieces. So really breaking down that kind of silo of this is all happening individually, but really how this all works together. And that really is a main focus of all of our collaboration. And then last but not least, in Eastern Connecticut, a real focus on housing justice and narrative change. And Beth, I'm not sure if you're on, but Beth Sibilia leading that work. They've been doing some really tremendous work around tenant protections in East Lyme in particular. In the space of a month and a half, I think, is pretty wild. They were able to help organize tenants in a building in East Lyme and Windward Village and actually get the town to vote for a fair rent commission, which is now being stood up. So that has really been exciting to see that all taking shape. And then lastly, I will just, sure you can all read that, so I won't read it back to you. No, we're getting close to time and I want to make sure we have time for discussion, but all of this work is really centered and supported by data-driven tools and resources. So we have a whole host of tools, playbooks, and guidebooks and dashboards that really are helping provide the background and foundation for all of the work that we're doing together. So with that, I will stop sharing my screen and turn it back to Julian for a conversation. Thank you, Julian.
Thank you, Melissa. And I think you made it abundantly clear based on the complexity of the model that, some of the core tenets of collective impact are really evident in what you all are doing at the CHOs, right? We're addressing a complex system, so it takes a complex structure with folks, once again, across sectors working together collaboratively to address the issue comprehensively. So with that, Sean, the Partnership for Strong Communities was one of the original partners at the table when the Fairfield County version of the CHO was first conceived in 2018. What was the impetus for this collaboration from your perspective, and how has it impacted your approach to addressing legislative opportunities and challenges?
Thanks, Julian. Going back to maybe 2017, early 2018, this idea really was generated by then Supportive Housing Works, now Housing Collective leader David Rich approached us really to look at opportunity to work together to focus some work in Fairfield County. And from my perspective, I'd been at the partnership for a year or two at that point, and the Partnership for Strong Communities has had a very long history of working to yes, lobbying and working on policy and at the state level, but also bringing that down to the individual municipal leaders, municipalities, to try to work with municipalities to encourage affordable housing development. And after a little time at the partnership, it's clear that a small organization in Hartford can't do that level of local or regional work on its own. And so myself personally was very interested in the idea of focusing on a region, really bringing to bear all of our expertise with local expertise and regional expertise that existed in Fairfield County, working directly with the community foundation. That was really attractive to us. Just because of that potential synergy, but also from a housing policy perspective, Fairfield County was and is a very important region in the state. It's a region that would grow quite a lot more, but for a lot of resistance to housing development. And as a result, our affordable housing crisis is most severe in Fairfield County. So to me, all of that came together to have it make a lot of sense for us to work on this partnership.
Thank you, Sean. So I think it'd be safe to say that boots on the ground in Fairfield County specifically are
Right.
going to be critical in order to get this work done in earnest, right? And I want to switch over to Jim. One of the cornerstones of LISC's work is clearly affordable housing and community development. That's one of your bread and butters for anyone who knows about the work of LISC, and you certainly execute on that well in our state of Connecticut. You're also one of the newer strategic partners for the Centers for Housing Opportunity. So tell us a little bit about why LISC is leaning into this specific approach.
Sure. So we were invited about a year ago by the Housing Collective to join the Centers for Housing Opportunity. And we really jumped at this opportunity because we realized that with the magnitude of the housing crisis in our state, we can't keep doing business the same way that we've done it over the 40 years that we've been in Connecticut. We really need to ramp up our activity. And there's an opportunity to do so not only through this collaboration, but because of investments that are being made by philanthropy and by the state. We have an unprecedented amount of funding coming in from state agencies, DOH, CHFA, DECD, and others. And we really need to leverage that with our collective work, the collective impact that we can have by working together. A lot of LISC's work, although we are statewide, has been focused on the Hartford area. And so by partnering with the CHOs, we are hoping to really expand the work that we do in Litchfield County, in Fairfield County, and in Eastern Connecticut. And as an example of that, just since we started, we've met with Beth Sibilia in Eastern Connecticut. She arranged a tour for us in New London and is planning another in Norwich and a third one in Northeastern Connecticut for us to meet with their housing partners and start to talk to developers about getting projects done. Because for us at LISC, that's really our focus. We want to invest and see these projects come to fruition. And by working with the Housing Collective and with the Partnership for Strong Communities, as well as a lot of other partners, that's the way we see this happening.
Thank you, Jim. And I think it's interesting that you mentioned philanthropy and where philanthropy is trending in terms of our investments. From my perspective as a funder, we hear a lot from folks like the LISC of the world, the Housing Collective of the world, the partnerships of the world, and they're all asking for a similar kind of menu of ways that philanthropy can do things differently, right? Fund and participate more in advocacy, do more co-funding to allow for opportunities for innovation and closing gaps, more trust-based relationships, and certainly treating nonprofits like the businesses that they are and investing in nonprofit capacity to make sure that our mutual goals can be pursued in a fashion that's financially sustainable, right? So hopefully one day 100 years from now, we can all go away and our kids' kids can enjoy the fruits of our collective labor, right? But I want to pass it back to Melissa. The Housing Collective has traditionally focused its efforts on homelessness, right? I talked about ODFC a little bit in my introduction. So why is your organization now putting so much attention on affordable housing and serving as the backbone for the CHOs?
So going back, we talked about this a little bit earlier, and Sean mentioned those early conversations with David Rich, back in 2017, there was a recognition by the Housing Collective that for all the work that the Housing Collective has done in homelessness and, in its former incarnation as supportive housing work, and before that Fairfield 08, that work has been meaningful and productive and getting, closer to ending homelessness to a point, and then COVID, and then, where we are today, and understanding that we can't end homelessness without affordable housing, that all the different amazing things that folks are doing on the homelessness service side of things are, can only get so far if there aren't homes for people to go to, and that our affordable housing crisis really is the block. There's no way that folks can come out of homelessness into permanent housing without housing. So it's kind of that simple and that important. And what I've been saying to folks, I've been in this role just a little over a year, that I've worked in housing my whole career, and housing and homelessness have always been these very separate kind of streams of work and lines of business in a way. And so this, has been really important shift that has happened from the perspective of our organization. But I think across the country, there's, more and more of that conversation, of that coming together is really happening. So I think it is that simple, but also, being able to apply all of that experience on the homeless service response side with collective impact and bringing that to affordable housing and saying, how can we apply those same approaches and methodologies and that same systems change mindset to the affordable housing space. So that's really, where the Housing Collective entered into and continues to, feel very, very strongly that this is really the only path forward, is if we all do this work together as a collective.
Thank you for that, Melissa. And I just want to remind folks in the audience, if you have questions for the panel, we are going to leave about 10 minutes at the end for some audience Q&A. I see we have one. Thank you, Patty. I encourage others to take the leap and ask away. Another question. The CHO collaboration seems to be very focused on building public will, right? Getting folks to kind of participate locally, to say yes to projects where otherwise the only voices that might be heard are the no's. We heard that a little bit in the mayor's panel, if you participated in that earlier this afternoon. So Sean, how about you? Why do you think that building public will is so critical to this work?
Well, Julian, I thought when you asked that question, I thought back to just yesterday morning with Jerusalem Demsis, our keynote speaker. For those of you that heard her speak, she talked a lot about, and this is something I share with her, that this problem is one of political power. It's not, or political will, if you will. It's not for lack of solutions. And therefore, building public will is the only path to true success in these efforts. And I see it already. Many of our policy priorities at the state level that the partnership works on with all of you are reflected in a lot of the work that we see in the regions, whether it's working on the affordable housing plans, strengthening those, just cause eviction, increasing state investments in affordable housing. It's all about trying to create that public will, but also take some of that public will and go up to Hartford and say, this is what we are hearing locally and in the regions. And the CHO model really facilitates that.
And Melissa, what parts of the model do you think are most effective in building public will? What have you seen?
I think I'll go back to the example, I mentioned earlier, Julian, in East Lyme, where there's regional directors that are really close to the ground, that know what's going on, that hear from people and can really identify those opportunities to take the resources, as I mentioned earlier, also, we have a whole bunch of work that we have done to really study the messaging of how do you change hearts and minds? What are the messages that we've been using that have not been working and why? And how do we message around affordable housing in ways that really do get people moving in the right direction? But you can have that academically. How do you then apply that? So the example in Eastern Connecticut and East Lyme, where some folks came to our director there, or came to her attention through various sources, that a New York real estate entity had come in and bought a building and was raising rents $800 to $900 a month overnight on folks who are elderly and disabled. Beth's team was able to come in and meet with the tenants, work with them, and share with them the resources we had developed. Here's what you say at a public meeting. Here's how you approach this. We're here to support you and to provide, we'll make the signs, we'll, be there at the meeting. We will arm you with what you all need to say, to share to lift up your own voices. So it really is connecting those dots between kind of this sociological, theoretical, like if we keep talking about an affordable housing crisis and people sort of tune that out and are so used to hearing it that, okay, what do you want me to do about it? If we start to think about other messaging and other ways we get people engaged in that, and then when we find opportunities to really activate, helping to provide those tools and activate communities to make real change. And that's a really wonderful example because, again, in very short order, folks came out, they were heard, a fair rent commission has been adopted, and they're continuing to follow that and follow it up as that moves forward to make sure that that is really meaningful and impactful for those residents. So that's just one example, but I think a really good one.
Yeah, it's a very powerful example. And that makes me think about challenges, right? This work is there are clearly an abundance of challenges in doing this work and doing it successfully. But Jim, LISC is probably most similar to the foundation in the way that we try to encourage organizations to come together and collaborate for some greater mission than we might address at our own individual organizations, right? And we've talked a lot about the opportunities and how critical collaboration is in this work. So from your perspective and the perspective of LISC Connecticut, why doesn't this type of work happen more amongst aligned organizations? What are some of the challenges?
Yeah, I think anyone could answer this because it's the same for all of us. Collaboration is so important, and we recognize that, but it's hard to do because it takes time with the meetings that we have. We have monthly meetings with our CHO partners. We talk a lot more frequently than that, but we have those formal monthly meetings, but it's the time that you have to put in. Time is money, of course, and resources are limited. And a lot of times we end up competing with each other for resources instead of trying to grow the pie. And I do think that this collaboration for the CHOs and collaboration generally really can increase resources that are available to do the work. So right now, as I mentioned, the state is putting in an unprecedented level of funding, but we have to make sure that we can tap into that. And the only way to do that is to think differently and operate differently from the ways that we have in the past. And the CHOs are an example of that. And I think ultimately we will be able to help direct resources from the state to where we think that they are needed most. So Julian, earlier you mentioned, for example, racial equity and the reason for the foundation's engagement with this work. And that's also very important to LISC. And as we seek to open up the suburbs to more affordable housing, part of our thinking is we want people to be able to live wherever they wish to live. And the reality is that a lot of people of color, lower income people, have not been able to move to suburban and rural communities if they wanted to, because there is a lack of affordable housing and really an unwelcoming atmosphere in those communities. So by working together in that collaboration, even though it's hard, we can talk to each other, we can figure out how to open up more doors in that way. We can also leverage funding from places like the Community Foundation. I want to mention too that the Connecticut Project has been incredibly generous with all of our organizations as part of this effort. So for example, it is funding a loan pool that is based at LISC for pre-development and acquisition funding that we are using in any town that is subject to 8-30G of the general statutes, the Affordable Housing Appeals Procedure. The Connecticut Project has also funded LISC, along with the Partnership for Strong Communities, to develop the Affordable Housing Development Resource Tool. And so by working together and leveraging our strengths, we can get more support from foundations. So even though it's a challenge to work together, I think there are advantages to doing so, and we're beginning to see those happen.
Thank you for that, Jim. And I certainly want to open that question up to Sean and Melissa. Both of your organizations serve very unique roles in the space, but you've still been able to collaborate effectively. What have been some of the key factors to allowing that?
I'm happy to jump in. We could tag team this one, Sean, and just have
Sure.
a really honest conversation. So one of the biggest pieces here is trust, right? And that's hard across organizations because we're all nonprofits. As Jim said, we all need to make sure that we're all whole and that we're making sure that we have our staff and programs fully funded sort of individually. And so really the funding, the aligned funding piece is critical, as I said at the beginning. And so having philanthropy help us build our trust with each other by funding us in concert to do collaborative work really helps us to learn to do that and to build that trust, because it's not traditionally how the nonprofit space has functioned, right? It's every org for itself. And if I get more, it means you got less. So we're not going to share our secrets, right? But what we can really start to see, and it's really exciting, is if we're able to build trust and develop trust and approach funders jointly for joint work that we're all funded to do. And that's the key, right? Everyone needs to have the funding to support their time and capacity to do this work. So that's sort of, I would say, the biggest challenge and opportunity all at the same time is if we can do that and be successful in that, it's tremendous, right? It's just being able to do that. And it's tricky, we've all, and communication is always hard even within organizations. So then when you have communication across organizations, and if it's by email or sometimes by text, sometimes, things get misconstrued or misunderstood or conversations, happen. So we've all worked really, really hard to put our best foot forward, and to be good partners with one another. And I won't pretend we haven't had our bumps in the road, right? That's all part of it. And really being able to get, back together and talk about it. And as Jim said, all of that collaborative time that we do need to spend together in meetings, which is, also a challenge to make space for. But I think, we're really making some great progress. And I'll say, my favorite work friends are all on the screen, right? Like it's just, it's been amazing and hard all at the same time.
Yeah, I'll add a little to that, Julian. The Partnership for Strong Communities has a history of working collaborative coalitions, building collaborative coalitions, providing that backbone role in homelessness with the Reaching Home campaign and affordable housing with the Home Connecticut campaign. And the challenges I think we see in those efforts, we see, with CHO too. And both Jim and Melissa mentioned, like, meeting and conversations. That's working collaboratively is intensive if you want to do it right. And we're all trying to do an awful lot of different things in this space. So that's a challenge to keep that level of engagement, going. And particularly as we've grown, and now we have three centers too. That one thing that you didn't touch on yet, but that I really love about the model is that they're all different. And with the work in Litchfield County is very different than the work in Litchfield County, which is different than the work in Fairfield County. There's of course some similarities too, but and that's to me one of the strengths of the model, is that we can draw from our expertise and try to work together on regionally specific strategies. But I think it all starts with all those kind of collective goals, whether it's Home Connecticut or this. It starts with those, having those common goals, right? And then driving strategies that we can all agree on from those common goals. It's easier once we have the goals.
Thank you all. And with that, we will switch to audience Q&A. We have one question in the chat, and I will once again encourage folks to put questions in the chat, or if you want to raise your hand, we can call on you to come off mute and maybe ask a question of our panelists. But Patty asked a very interesting question. I think it's interesting because for those of us that have been doing collective impact for a while, we know that connection to community voice is very critical to getting the work done. Patty asked, what and where are the opportunities for those with lived experience to partner at decision-making tables in order to improve policies, programs, and practices, such as commissions, boards, or community collaborations? And Melissa, I see you're off mute, but this question is for everyone.
I know I've done a lot of talking, so I can wait my turn. Other folks want to jump in on this one.
No, you go ahead, Melissa.
Okay,
You're ready.
well, I'm going to start with, that I'll just speaking for my experience, in my career in the housing advocacy space, we have not been great at this, to be really honest about it, right? There's been a lot of for communities and not with communities when it comes to housing policy and discussions. And one of the things that we are, I think, really moving in the right direction on, but still have more work to do, is to create those spaces and those tables, and to not just create them, but one of the things I think that are most important about being a backbone is to support spaces that are already happening. Because whether we talk about community voice sort of at these kind of high level housing, and that's the wrong word, excuse me, tables where traditional power has sat, I guess we'll put it that way, have not necessarily, or have not included community voice, right? And so but those tables exist. There are communities having conversations. It's not that doesn't exist, it's just there's not a connection necessarily between those. So really working hard and intentionally to support tables and spaces. One of them in particular, Fairfield County, which is a great example, is a Housing Equity Coalition, which is a tremendous group of women primarily who are having amazing conversations and action around housing, and what can this work do to support that, to not sort of supplant it or bring it into something else, but to really support it as it is so that it can grow and flourish. And then also to create spaces that are equitable, democratized spaces. And so in Fairfield County in particular, we are working on an alliance for housing that is attempting to do that. I think we're hopeful and optimistic. And actually, I just came off a call just before this one to prep. We have a meeting coming up in early December where we're really resetting the table, because I think just bringing tables together that already exist is really challenging. What can we do moving forward to create new tables that really are inclusive and equitable from the beginning, where everybody is coming with voice, and see where we go. So I think we're just kind of still, sadly in a way, but excitingly at the beginning of that really important work in terms of how meaningful it is, and not just saying that it's happening, but it really happening. And it's great to see that emerging. And then one last thing, and I will pass it along, is we are also looking at the decision-making tables. I think I mentioned this earlier, but really taking a hard look at who is making land use decisions in our regions and across the state of Connecticut, and what we can do to support more democratic representative participation in boards and commissions. Because, we talked about public will earlier. It's public will in terms of changing the system that we're, working within today. But wouldn't it be amazing if decision-making was more equitable and more representative of communities that it serves? So because local control is how decisions are made, having more representation at boards and commissions will go a long way to more democratic decision-making, that represents the views of more people in our communities. So I'll stop there.
I can add some. One, I share Melissa's assessment that I think in general, sort of grass tops, if you will, or policy organizations and like Partnership for Strong Communities, that it's not working at the grassroots, not providing services directly. It's hard to have a good connection with the people that are most impacted by the policies we're working on. And I think so we've tried different ways, and some of them aren't always successful. I think one thing that's helped a lot, honestly, is a focus from the funders, particularly the community foundations. That's really, it's very different. I think all of us are working differently now than we would have, say, in 2019, right? And some of that is funder driven, and I think that helps. And another example I would use, I think one of the ways that we're trying to connect closer to the grassroots is through people that have been elevated to speak on their behalf. And I think of the tenants union is a great example of that. I know when we speak with the president of the Connecticut Tenants Union and other officers that I'm speaking to someone that has been given the authority to speak on the behalf of many, many tenants across the state on these policy issues. And it's a way for us to still do our work where we're best suited, but also to have legitimate input at the same time. It's not the only piece of it, but I think that that's been valuable.
Thank you, Sean and Melissa and Jim. We're gonna get you in here. One of the questions that I often get about collective impact, especially collective impact approaches to systems change, is how do you know you're being successful, right? How do you know the work is worth your while? So at LISC, what are some of the qualitative or quantitative measures that you look at to know, like, hey, we're getting the bang for our buck. We're really moving the needle here.
Yeah, well, I mean, certainly it's looking at the level of investment that we make both through grants and loans in the community, as well as the number of units that are developed and are managed by the community development corporations that we work with. A lot of our work, our reason for being, is to work with CDCs, and so part of the measure there too is to make sure that the CDCs are thriving, and we've been doing a lot of work in terms of capacity building for CDCs around the state. We're also in the process right now of figuring out how to better measure our sort of interim work, if you will, like not just the units that are built and the dollars that are invested, but looking at what is the impact of our community engagement and how can we tell that we're doing a good job, with bringing in resident voice. How can we better measure the financial stability that we help to create by more home ownership for lower income people. And so right now we are participating in a cohort that again is philanthropy driven, sponsored by the Connecticut Project, and there was another one sponsored by the Hartford Foundation for Public Giving with CT data. And the current cohort involves I think 6 or 7 housing organizations, and for all of us to look at, it's just getting started, to look at how we measure those outcomes. And it's not something that I think we've traditionally done a great job with, and that by sitting down collectively, thinking together with each other as housing organizations, as well as with CT data to guide us, to really think through how we better measure, as you said, qualitatively as well as quantitatively, the work that we're doing. And I think that the qualitative is really important. And another area that I'll say, at least for LISC, we haven't really done a great job with in the past with regard to communicating and marketing what we're doing, and really hearing the voices of residents about what a difference affordable housing makes in their life. And I think that if we can do a better job of that, that will help to change minds to the public will building question that you asked earlier. If people can see what a difference this makes in our communities, and that we are doing better with allowing people who are new to this country or new to the community to improve their lives. Jerusalem, who Sean mentioned earlier, the keynote speaker yesterday, was talking about how she grew up in affordable housing in Montgomery County, Maryland, and how that housing wasn't made specifically for her, but it was because of a public policy that was put in place to create inclusionary zoning and to build affordable housing units in one of the wealthiest counties in the country. And we need to have her story and the stories of other people who have benefited from living in that affordable housing. So that's another way that we better need to measure and communicate the work that we're doing.
Thank you, Jim. And it looks like we're just about at time. So I want to thank everyone in the audience for sticking with us. I know this 50 minutes has flown by for me. I want to thank Melissa, Sean, and Jim for your dedication to this panel and the pre-work. I know a lot of hard work goes into what you do every day, but you certainly work just as hard to put this together. So thank you. And thank you to the partnership for bringing us together. This has truly been a fulfilling experience. Last thing I'll do is I'll just pass it to Kayla, who will wrap us up with any housekeeping items.
Thanks, Jim.
Thank you so much, Julian, Jim, Sean, and Melissa. That was amazing. I'm sure we all have some really great takeaways from this session, and we'll be revisiting it as we head into the next year. Thank you, everyone, who attended this session. We have another great round of sessions coming up at 2 o'clock. So take this 10 minutes to figure out which one of them you're going to attend. And thank you all. Have a good rest of your day.